Imagine hunting without a single weapon of metal or a spark of gunpowder and still feeding hundreds. This wasn't luck. It was mastery, carved from patience, silence, and a mind tuned to the wild. The indigenous peoples of America weren't just good at hunting. They were masters of it. They turned the landscape itself into their hunting partner. They read animal behavior like you read text messages. And they did all of this without a single piece of modern technology. Today, we're going deep into their world. You're going to learn how they trapped massive bison herds using nothing but knowledge of wind patterns and terrain. We'll talk about the plant poisons they applied to arrow tips that could drop the largest animals. And I'm going to reveal something that might surprise you. The most important hunting tool they had wasn't made of wood, stone, or sinew. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll never think about survival the same way again. The mind of the hunter. Before we get into bows, traps, and techniques, we need to talk about something that modern people completely overlook. The real weapon wasn't held in the hand. It was between the ears. Think about how you prepare for something important today. Maybe you check your phone, gather your tools, make a plan. Indigenous hunters did something completely different. They prepared their minds. The hunt started days, sometimes weeks, before anyone picked up a weapon. A hunter would study everything about his prey. Where did deer drink water? When did elk move between feeding grounds? How did weather patterns change animal behavior? This wasn't casual observation. This was complete immersion. And here's what's incredible. They didn't just know these things in theory, they felt them. A skilled hunter could sense where an animal would be days in advance, just by noticing shifts in the wind, slight changes in temperature, or which plants were starting to ripen. That kind of awareness doesn't come from technology. Not even Google could predict nature like that. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. The hunter had to become invisible, not just visually, but in every way. He controlled his breathing so it wouldn't create visible puffs in cold air. He learned to move so silently that dry leaves wouldn't crack under his feet. He masked his scent by rubbing specific plants on his skin and clothes. Patience was everything. Modern people scroll their phones when they're bored for 30 seconds. These hunters could lie motionless in the same spot for 6, 7, 8 hours, waiting, watching, becoming part of the landscape. They trained themselves to think like rocks, like bushes, like shadows. The ground told them stories. A broken branch wasn't just a broken branch. It revealed what animal passed by, how heavy it was, which direction it was traveling, and how long ago. Trampled grass showed them speed and urgency. A barely visible track in dry dirt could tell them if an animal was injured, pregnant, or being chased. Their senses operated at a level most of us can't imagine. They caught smells we'd never notice. They heard sounds our ears would filter out as background noise. They saw movement in their peripheral vision that would escape our focused stare. Before leaving for a hunt, rituals were performed. Now, you might think this was superstition, but there was something deeper happening. These rituals focused the mind. They created a mental state of clarity and respect. The hunter acknowledged that he was about to take a life, and that act deserved reverence. This psychological preparation gave him confidence without arrogance, calmness without carelessness. Clarity of thought when split-second decisions meant the difference between success and going home empty-handed. Here's what I want you to understand. In our world, we solve problems by adding technology. Better tools, better apps, better gadgets. Indigenous hunters went the opposite direction. They removed everything except pure skill and awareness. And it worked better than you'd ever imagine. Let me know in the comments, do you think modern people could develop even a fraction of this mental discipline? Or have we become too dependent on technology to ever go back? The bow and arrow. All right, now let's talk about the weapon you've probably been waiting for. The bow and arrow. But this isn't some primitive stick and string we're talking about. This was precision engineering that took decades to master. First, the bow itself. You couldn't just grab any piece of wood and bend it. Specific species were chosen: yew, juniper, ash. Why? Because they had the perfect combination of strength and flexibility. Too rigid and it would snap. Too flexible and it wouldn't have any power. The wood had to be harvested at the right time of year, then dried for months or even years. The drying process was carefully controlled. Rush it and the bow would be weak. Do it wrong and it would warp. But here's where it gets interesting. The most powerful bows weren't just wood. Hunters would take dried animal tendons, soften them, and carefully glue them to the back of the bow. This tendon layer acted like a biological spring. When you pulled the string back, the tendon stretched. When you released, they snapped forward with explosive force. The glue holding this together, made from boiled bones or animal hide. The bowstring, woven from tendons or plant fibers, chosen for strength and minimal stretch. Everything had to be perfect because the accuracy of every shot depended on that string staying consistent. Now, arrows. You might think an arrow is simple. It's not. The shaft had to be perfectly straight. Any curve or wobble would send it off course. Young willow shoots were harvested, then painstakingly straightened over fire, held in position until they cooled in the correct shape. The arrowhead was where real craftsmanship showed. Using tools made of harder stone, hunters would chip away at pieces of flint or obsidian. Each strike had to be precise. Too hard and the piece would shatter. Too soft and nothing would happen. They created razor-sharp, symmetrical points that could punch through thick hide. The feathers on the back of the arrow weren't decoration. They were flight stabilizers. Eagle or turkey feathers were cut in half and attached to the shaft. But the angle mattered enormously. Proper feathering made the arrow spin in flight, like a bullet from a rifled barrel. This spin stabilized the trajectory and dramatically improved accuracy. Learning to shoot took a lifetime. Training started in childhood. Young boys would shoot at targets every single day. By the time they were adults, they didn't aim consciously. Their bodies knew. They could shoot moving targets from 50 yards away, releasing the arrow at exactly the right microsecond. Different situations required different bows. Short bows were perfect for hunting from horseback on the open plains. You needed something compact and quick. Long, powerful bows were used in forests for hunting large game. More draw weight meant more penetration. This tool represents something important. Indigenous peoples weren't less intelligent than modern humans. They were working with different materials, but their engineering was brilliant. A well-made bow was quiet, deadly accurate, and could be used for years if maintained properly. But a lone hunter with a bow could only do so much. What if your tribe needed to feed 300 people through the winter? For that, you needed a different strategy entirely. The bison jump. Let me describe something that sounds impossible. Imagine taking a herd of massive, powerful bison, each one weighing up to 2,000 pounds, and getting hundreds of them to run off a cliff. No guns, no explosives, no vehicles, just human intelligence and coordination. This actually happened. It was called a bison jump, or pisgun in some languages, and it was one of the most sophisticated hunting operations ever developed. First, location. Tribes would scout for high, steep cliffs near areas where bison naturally grazed. Once they found the right spot, it could be used for generations. Archaeological sites show some jumps were used for over 1,000 years. At the bottom of the cliff, they'd build holding pens from stones and logs. These kept the fallen animals contained and made processing easier. Now here's the genius part. Leading up to the cliff, they'd construct 2 long lines of cairns, brush piles, or poles stuck in the ground. These lines started far apart and gradually converged, creating a funnel shape that led directly to the cliff edge. When it was time to hunt, this became a massive community operation. Scouts would locate a herd and carefully, over days if necessary, begin gently pushing them toward the wide opening of the funnel. Dozens of people would hide behind the cairns and brush piles along the funnel walls. Their job was to wait silently until the herd entered. Then there was the buffalo runner. This was one of the most dangerous and honored roles. A young, fast hunter would wrap himself in a buffalo hide and position himself between the herd and the cliff. His job was to run ahead of the herd, leading them toward the edge while looking like one of their own. Once the bison entered the funnel and started moving, people jumped out from behind the barriers. They'd wave hides, shout, create chaos. The bison, now panicked and confused, would try to turn around but found themselves blocked by a wall of noise and movement. The rear animals pushed the front ones forward. The herd's own momentum became its downfall. They couldn't see the cliff edge until it was too late. The front runners tried to stop, but thousands of pounds of bison behind them made it impossible. What happened next was both terrible and necessary. The herd plunged over the edge. The impact killed many instantly. Others were injured and were quickly dispatched by hunters waiting below. A single successful bison jump could provide enough meat, hides, bones, and sinew to sustain an entire tribe through winter. We're talking about tons of resources from one coordinated operation. But this wasn't just about food. The bison jump was a social event, almost ceremonial. It required trust, timing, and cooperation. Every person had a role. Mess up your part and the whole thing could fail. This kind of coordination built community bonds and passed knowledge between generations. Think about what this represents: landscape engineering, animal psychology, logistics, and perfect timing all working together. No written plans, no project managers, no technology. Just human minds working in perfect coordination with the natural world. Traps and snares. Big hunts like bison jumps were spectacular, but they were rare. Day-to-day survival depended on smaller, consistent food sources. This is where traps came in, and the variety is mind-blowing. The simplest was the snare trap. Take a loop of strong cordage made from sinew or even horsehair. Place it on an animal trail where you know rabbits, foxes, or other small game regularly pass. Hide it carefully in grass or leaves. When an animal walks through, the loop tightens around its leg or neck. But basic snares could be escaped from. So hunters added a spring mechanism. They'd bend a young sapling down and connect it to the snare with a trigger system. When the animal triggered it, the tree would snap upright, lifting the animal off the ground. No escape. Crushed traps were brutal but effective. A heavy log or flat stone would be carefully balanced on trigger sticks. Bait was placed underneath. When an animal disturbed the trigger, the weight fell. These could take down predators and mid-sized game. For birds, especially waterfowl, nets were woven from plant fibers. These would be stretched across water in areas where birds landed to rest. At night, hunters would quietly approach and scare the flock. In the darkness, birds would fly directly into the nets. Rivers offered their own opportunities. Fish weirs were incredible constructions. Imagine building a wall across a flowing river using stones or stakes driven into the riverbed. You'd leave one narrow opening that led into a woven basket trap. Fish could swim in easily but couldn't figure out how to swim back out. These traps worked 24/7, catching fish even while the tribe slept. Pit traps were used for larger animals like deer or even elk. A deep hole would be dug on a known animal trail. The bottom could be lined with sharpened stakes pointing upward. The whole thing would be camouflaged with branches, leaves, and dirt. An animal walking its usual path would suddenly crash through and be unable to climb out. What's remarkable is the engineering thinking required. Each trap had to account for the specific behavior of different animals. Rabbits move fast and low. Birds approach from above. Fish swim against current. Every species required a different solution. Placement was crucial. You couldn't just put a trap anywhere. You had to understand where animals felt safe, where they traveled, what attracted them. A trap in the wrong spot would sit empty forever. Camouflage was an art form. The trap had to be completely invisible. One unnatural shadow, one wrong smell, and animals would avoid the area entirely. These silent hunters worked around the clock in all weather. They required no attention, no energy expenditure after setup. A single hunter could maintain dozens of traps, creating a reliable food system that complemented active hunting. This is what I mean by efficiency through intelligence. Modern people think of primitive hunting as crude and difficult, but look at what they actually did. They created automated systems that provided food while they focused on other tasks. That's not primitive, that's smart. If you're getting value from this, hit that subscribe button. We go deep into historical topics like this every week, and there's a lot more to explore about indigenous wisdom and survival techniques. The spear and atlatl. Let's talk about the original human weapon. The spear has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and there's a reason it never went away. A hunting spear wasn't like a spear you'd throw in modern javelin competitions. It was carefully balanced, with a stone or bone tip that could punch through hide and muscle. The shaft had to be straight and strong enough not to flex too much on impact. Using a spear for hunting often meant group tactics. Multiple hunters would surround a large animal, preventing escape. They'd strike from different angles, overwhelming the prey's ability to defend itself. This required trust and coordination. One person mistyming their strike could get someone else killed. But here's where technology made a leap forward. Someone, thousands of years ago, invented the atlatl, and it changed everything. An atlatl is basically a stick with a hook or cup on one end and a handle on the other. You place the back of your spear in the hook. When you throw, the atlatl acts as an extension of your arm, creating a longer lever. Physics tells us that longer levers mean more force. The atlatl could more than double the throwing distance and impact power. A spear thrown by hand might travel 30 meters with moderate force. The same spear thrown with an atlatl could reach 100 meters and hit hard enough to punch through a bison's shoulder blade. This meant hunters could attack dangerous animals from a safer distance. A bear, a big cat, a wounded elk, any of these could kill you easily in close combat. The atlatl gave you standoff range, but using one required serious skill. The motion was complex. You had to coordinate your whole body. Legs, hips, shoulders, arm, and wrist all working in sequence. Release timing had to be perfect. Too early or too late and the spear would fly off target. Training started young. Kids would practice with small atlatls and light spears, gradually building the muscle memory needed for the complex throwing motion. By adulthood, a skilled hunter could hit a target the size of a dinner plate from 50 meters away. Even after the bow was invented, the atlatl stayed in use. In thick forest, you might not have room to draw a bow. A short, powerful spear throw could be faster and more effective. Different tools for different situations. What I find fascinating is how this represents human innovation. Someone looked at the problem of, I can't throw hard enough, and instead of accepting that limitation, they invented a tool that changed the physics of the situation. This same pattern of innovation shows up everywhere in indigenous technology. Camouflage and stealth. Having the best weapons in the world doesn't matter if you can't get close enough to use them. This is where camouflage and stealth become survival skills. Let's start with the basics. Your clothing had to match your environment. If you were hunting in autumn forest, you'd wear tanned hides in browns and tans. Winter hunting meant whites and grays. Open prairie required earth tones, but color alone wasn't enough. Animals see movement better than they see static objects, so clothing had to break up the human silhouette. Fringes, irregular edges, anything that made you look less like a human shape. Scent was equally important, maybe more so. Most game animals have noses that are thousands of times more sensitive than ours. They can smell you from hundreds of yards away. So hunters would rub themselves with plants that grow in the area. Pine needles, sage, crushed grass, whatever made them smell like the environment instead of like a human. Some hunters went further. They'd collect urine or droppings from the prey animals themselves and use that to mask their scent. Unpleasant, sure. Effective, absolutely. Wind direction determined everything. You always approach from downwind, meaning the wind carried your scent away from the animal. If the wind shifted, You had to reposition or abandon the approach entirely. Patience. Sometimes hunters would use an animal skin as full camouflage. To hunt bison, a hunter might drape himself in a wolf pelt and move on all fours. Bison weren't afraid of lone wolves. They'd let one get relatively close enough for a shot. The actual movement was an art form. Modern people walk heel to toe, making noise with every step. Indigenous hunters learned to place their feet differently. Toes first, testing the ground, then gradually shifting weight. If they felt something that might crack or crunch, they'd adjust before committing their full weight. Speed didn't matter. Smoothness did. A slow, flowing movement was nearly invisible. A quick, jerky movement would catch an animal's eye instantly. They'd use terrain to stay hidden, approaching behind rocks, trees, or dips in the ground. They'd move when the animal's head was down feeding, freeze when it looked up. Every detail mattered. This wasn't just taught through instruction. Children grew up playing stalking games. Who could sneak up on their friend without being heard? Who could hide so well they couldn't be found? These games built the exact skills needed for adult survival. Think about what this required. Total body control, environmental awareness, infinite patience, and the ability to think from the prey's perspective. You had to predict what would alert the animal and avoid doing those things. Modern hunters sit in tree stands wearing camouflage bought from a store, and they still struggle to get close to deer. Indigenous hunters could crawl to within a few meters of prey that had better senses than any modern animal. The skill level difference is staggering. Calls and decoys. Being invisible was one strategy, but what if you could make the animal come to you? That's where calls and decoys came in, and this might be the most creative hunting technique of all. Animal communication is complex. Different calls mean different things. A deer makes one sound when it's alarmed, another when it's calling to fawns, another during mating season. Hunters learned all of these and could reproduce them. Calls were made from whatever materials were available. Hollow bird bones made great small game calls. Birch bark could be rolled and twisted to create different tones. Hollowed-out horns worked for larger animals. Even certain leaves, when blown correctly, could imitate animal sounds. But the tool was only part of it. The hunter had to understand what the sound meant and when to use it. Call during the wrong season, and animals would ignore you or get suspicious. Use the wrong tone and you'd scare everything in the area away. A distress call could bring in predators. Imagine making the sound of an injured rabbit. Foxes, coyotes, even wolves would investigate, thinking they'd found an easy meal. Instead, they'd walk into arrow range. During mating season, you could imitate the call of a female. Male animals, driven by biology, would approach to investigate. Or you could make the challenge call of a rival male. Territorial animals would come in aggressive and ready to fight. Either way, they came to you instead of you tracking them. Elk bugling is a perfect example. During rut, bulls make a loud, eerie call. Hunters could replicate this with carved wooden tubes. A bull hearing what it thought was a rival would come in looking for confrontation. Visual decoys were equally clever. A piece of white fur waved in the brush could look like a deer's tail. Deer are curious animals. They'd approach to investigate, bringing them into shooting range. Some hunters created full stuffed decoys. These were time-consuming to make but incredibly effective. A deer decoy placed in a clearing would attract other deer. A turkey decoy would bring in toms during breeding season. Scent lures added another dimension. Musk from certain glands, especially during breeding season, could be used to attract animals. Plant-based scents could also work. Deer, for example, are attracted to certain fruits and nuts. A hunter might crush these and use the smell as an attractant. What I want you to appreciate is how this represents understanding animal behavior at the deepest level. You couldn't just make random noises and hope for the best. You had to know what each sound meant, how animals would react, and when to use it. This was hunting as communication. The hunter wasn't dominating nature. He was participating in it, speaking its language, becoming part of the conversation. When done correctly, the animal willingly came closer, never knowing the hunter was there until it was too late. Poisoned arrows. Now we get into something that sounds almost mythical, but was absolutely real. Some tribes had access to plants and animals that produced powerful toxins, and they knew exactly how to use them. This knowledge was kept secret, passed down only to selected hunters who'd proven themselves trustworthy. Why the secrecy? Because the knowledge was dangerous. Mistakes could kill the hunter or poison the meat, making it unsafe to eat. The exact plants varied by region. Some tribes used plant saps that contained cardiac toxins. Others used certain mushrooms. In some areas, the skin secretions of specific frogs or toads were collected and concentrated. Each of these required different preparation methods. The process was often ritualized, not because of superstition, but because ritual creates consistency. Do the same steps in the same order every time and you get reliable results. Change something randomly and you might create a poison that's too weak or too strong. The prepared poison was a thick, sticky substance. It had to be applied carefully to the arrowhead. Too much and it might drip off or affect the arrow's flight. Too little and it wouldn't be effective. Here's the fascinating part. The poison had to be strong enough to kill or incapacitate the animal, but not so strong that it would spoil the meat. This required incredible precision. The hunters were essentially working as toxicologists without any formal training in chemistry. When a poisoned arrow struck, the hunter didn't immediately pursue. He'd wait, sometimes hours, giving the poison time to work. Then he'd follow the trail slowly and carefully. Eventually, he'd find the animal dead or too weak to run. The advantages were huge. A poisoned arrow didn't need to hit a vital organ. Even a muscle hit would work, because the toxin would spread through the bloodstream. This meant more successful hunts with less perfect shots. It also allowed a single hunter to take down animals that would normally require a group. A lone hunter with a poisoned arrow could kill a bear or a large elk without the risk of close combat. Safety precautions were strict. Poisoned arrows were marked with special symbols. They were stored separately from regular arrows. Everyone in the tribe knew not to touch them. When butchering an animal killed with poison, the area around the wound was carefully cut away and discarded. Interestingly, cooking often broke down the toxins, making the rest of the meat safe. The hunters understood this through trial and error over generations. This technology represents advanced understanding of botany, chemistry, and animal physiology. They identified which plants were toxic, figured out how to extract and concentrate the toxins, determined safe dosages, and developed storage and application methods. That's sophisticated science, just conducted through observation rather than lab equipment. Everything we've talked about so far has been about techniques and tools, but hunting was never just about the individual. The social aspects were just as important as the technical skills. When a hunter killed a large animal, he didn't keep it all. That would be unthinkable. There were strict rules about distribution, and everyone knew them. First shares went to whoever helped with the hunt. If 5 people worked together to surround and kill an elk, all 5 got portions. This encouraged cooperation and shared knowledge. Next came the elders, not because they were still actively hunting, but because they held the tribe's knowledge. Feeding them was feeding the community's memory and wisdom. After that, meat was distributed to families throughout the tribe. Special attention was paid to widows, orphans, and anyone who couldn't hunt for themselves. No one went hungry. This wasn't charity, it was how the system worked. A hunter who tried to hoard meat or keep the best parts for himself would face serious social consequences. He'd lose status and respect. In future hunts, others might not help him. In a survival situation, that could be fatal. This distribution system did something important. It made the best hunters invest in the whole community. Your status came not from accumulation but from generosity. The more you shared, the more respect you earned. Processing the animal was also communal. Men typically handled the heavy work of skinning and initial butchering. Women then took over, cutting meat into strips for drying, preparing fresh dishes, and processing the hide. And here's something that modern people often miss. Indigenous communities used everything, not because of some mystical connection, but because waste was stupid when resources were limited. Meat was eaten fresh or dried into jerky. Pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries, could last for years and was incredibly calorie-dense. Hides became clothing, shelter coverings, containers, and shields. Bones were carved into tools, weapons, needles, and decorative items. Tendons were split into thread for sewing or twisted into strong cordage. Sinew was used for bow strings and trap triggers. Even the stomach and intestines were cleaned and used as water containers or cooking vessels. Horns became cups or spoons. Hooves were boiled down to make glue. Brain matter was used in the leather tanning process. This complete utilization showed respect for the animal's sacrifice. Nothing was wasted. Every part had value. The social structure around hunting created a stable community. The vulnerable were protected. Knowledge was passed down. Cooperation was rewarded. Greed was punished. Compare this to modern economic systems where resources accumulate at the top and scarcity exists at the bottom. Indigenous hunting economies actively prevented that through cultural rules that everyone followed. This wasn't some utopian fantasy. It was practical survival strategy. A tribe where members starved while others hoarded wouldn't last long. A tribe where everyone was fed and equipped was strong, cohesive, and resilient. We've covered the practical side of hunting, but there's another dimension that's equally important. For indigenous peoples, hunting was never just a physical act. It was deeply spiritual. Animals weren't seen as objects or resources. They were understood as beings with their own life force, their own purpose in the world. Taking an animal's life was a serious act that required proper respect and ritual. Before a hunt, prayers were offered. The hunter would ask permission from the animal spirits. He'd explain that his family needed food. He'd promise to take only what was necessary and to use every part of the animal. This wasn't empty ritual. It was a way of focusing the mind and acknowledging the gravity of what he was about to do. It reinforced the idea that killing wasn't casual or recreational. There was a belief that animals would only give themselves to hunters who approached with the right attitude. A respectful, humble hunter would find success. A greedy or wasteful hunter would find empty trails and missed shots. After a successful kill, Thanksgiving rituals were performed. The hunter might leave an offering of tobacco near the animal. He might speak prayers of gratitude. He might perform specific songs or ceremonies that his tribe used to honor the animal's spirit. This worldview had practical effects. It prevented overhunting. If you believed animals would stop giving themselves to you if you were greedy, you'd only take what you needed. That's sustainable resource management, enforced through spiritual belief. It also created a relationship with the landscape. The hunter felt connected to the animals, plants, and land. He wasn't separate from nature, he was part of it. His life depended on the health of the whole ecosystem. Stories and legends reinforced these values. Young people grew up hearing tales about hunters who were blessed for their respect or punished for their arrogance. These stories taught ethics in a memorable, emotional way. The speed and efficiency of the kill mattered spiritually. A clean, quick death was respectful. Wounding an animal and letting it suffer was seen as a moral failing. It showed lack of skill or lack of proper spiritual preparation. This attitude is completely different from modern industrial meat production or even much of modern hunting. In indigenous worldview, the animal was a partner in a relationship, not a commodity to be harvested. Nature wasn't a resource to be exploited. It was a living system that you were part of. You could take from it, but you had to give back. You had to maintain balance. You had to show gratitude. The spiritual aspect and the practical aspect were inseparable. Ritual was as important as arrow sharpness. Mental preparation mattered as much as physical skill. You couldn't separate the hunter from his beliefs because those beliefs shaped how he hunted. So here's what we've learned. Indigenous hunting wasn't primitive. It was sophisticated, combining ecology, engineering, psychology, social organization, and spiritual practice into one complete system. They didn't dominate nature with technology. They worked with it, understanding its patterns and fitting themselves into the ecosystem. And it worked for thousands of years. Every technique we've discussed, from the mental preparation to the bison jump, from poisoned arrows to communal meat distribution, shows incredible intelligence and adaptability. The real lesson isn't about the specific tools or techniques. It's about the mindset. These hunters saw themselves as part of nature, not separate from it. They solved problems through observation and thought, not just through better equipment. We live in a world that's increasingly disconnected from where our food comes from. Most people have never hunted, never butchered an animal, never had to track prey or read signs in the landscape. That's fine. We have different systems now. But there's something worth remembering in how indigenous peoples approached survival. They were sustainable not because they had to be, but because their entire worldview was built around respect and balance. That's the wisdom we can carry forward. Not the specific hunting techniques, but the underlying philosophy of living in relationship with the natural world rather than in opposition to it. I want to hear from you. What other aspects of indigenous life interest you? Their agriculture systems, their medicine, their social structures. Drop your suggestions in the comments because there's a lot more to explore. And if you found this valuable, subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into history and traditional wisdom. Thanks for watching.